"Ma'am, the used lot is out back." The words hit like a slap, loud enough for nearby customers to glance over. One salesman chuckled. Another didn't bother to hide his smirk. Ella May Reed stood silently at the center of the polished dealership floor. Her coat was plain brown wool, frayed near the sleeves. Her boots were scuffed, thick-soled, made for dirt and cold. She clutched a thick white envelope to her chest, her fingers rough and strong, hands that had known decades of work. "I'm here to look at the Silverado," she said softly, nodding toward the gleaming silver. "Pick up under showroom lights." The younger salesman barked a laugh. "That one? Sweetheart, that truck costs more than your house." Another one added under his breath, "She's lost." Ella didn't blink. She walked past them toward the truck, slow and steady, her gaze calm but fixed. A young couple stopped mid-handshake with a salesman to stare. Ella stepped beside the truck, the biggest on the lot, lifted suspension, steel gray body. Built for work, it looked like it didn't belong inside. Neither, apparently, did she. One of the men leaned over to the other and muttered, "You watch. She's gonna ask for a brochure and leave." Ella placed the envelope on the hood, peeled it open. She pulled out a stack of paper, not brochures. Cash. Bundles of it, wrapped in rubber bands. The room fell quiet. "I'll take it," she said. No one laughed. Ella May Reed woke up every morning at 4:30 a.m. sharp. Not because she had to, no one was watching, and no alarm was needed. It was just the way she lived. She had been rising before the sun for as long as she could remember, long before her husband died, long before her son left for the city and didn't come back, long before the farm shrank to nothing but dry soil and rusting fences. The world didn't owe her anything. That's what she believed, and so she owed everything to herself: effort, discipline, quiet strength. She swung her legs out of bed and placed her feet firmly on the cold wooden floor. No hesitation. She tied her gray hair back with a black ribbon, the same one she'd worn for years, and moved through the house like a memory. Soft, practiced, exact. In the kitchen, she made coffee the old way, percolator on the stove, tin mug warmed by her palms. She didn't have much, but everything she owned worked hard. So did she. Outside, the wind tugged at the bare branches and carried the smell of earth. The small house stood alone on 3 acres of rough land outside Logan, Nebraska. The barn was half collapsed, but the tools inside were clean and sharp. Ella made sure of it. For 30 years, she had run that land beside her husband, Dale. He was a quiet man, like her, but his laugh had once filled the valley. After the heart attack took him in the middle of harvest, Ella didn't cry loud or long. She sat on the porch that night, hands folded in her lap, and said aloud, "We finish what we start." That was 8 years ago. Since then, she worked every job she could. She fixed fences for neighbors, cleaned out stables, took care of old horses. She shoveled snow from church steps in the winter, and stacked hay in the heat of July. She didn't complain, didn't ask for help. She was the kind of woman people respected from a distance, the kind they forgot until something broke. Every month, she took what she earned and slid it into an envelope marked in Dale's handwriting, "Truck Fund." It had started as a joke, something he wrote on an envelope 20 years ago when they both dreamed of a new truck that could haul feed and seed and all the weight their old Chevy couldn't carry. Back then, they always said someday. After he died, Ella didn't change the label. She just kept adding to it, little by little, season by season, until the envelope grew thick. That envelope lived in her drawer, under a folded flag, beside a yellowed photograph of Dale standing in front of the old barn, holding a coffee mug, his eyes squinting in the sun. There were hard days. Days she couldn't feel her fingers from the cold. Days her back gave out halfway through stacking lumber. Days when her bank account dropped to double digits, and the electric bill threatened to break her. But still, she rose early. Still, she sharpened her tools. Still, she counted cash at the table by lantern light. She never talked about her past, not even to herself. But when she worked, she remembered. She remembered the quiet meals with Dale, where love didn't need words. She remembered holding her son's small hand while teaching him how to plant a tomato. And she remembered watching that same boy walk away down the gravel road, city-bound, leaving the country and her behind. Ella never blamed him, Life called people in different directions. Her direction had always pointed here, into the wind, toward the work, with both feet on solid ground. Sometimes she would sit on the porch with her hands around her mug and whisper to the wind, almost there. That's how she marked time. Not in birthdays or holidays, but in progress. A new shovel, handle, repaired fencing, $300 added to the envelope. She didn't pray for miracles. She planned for them. Ella believed in two things: do your work and don't wait for applause. So when she walked into that dealership, small and quiet, in a threadbare coat and boots full of gravel, she carried more than cash. She carried years of sunrises, aching knees, split knuckles, and unspoken promises. And she carried Dale with her, not in grief but in purpose. The room was silent. Ella May Reed stood beside the Silverado, her envelope open on the hood, the neat stacks of rubber-banded bills resting plainly in view. Not fluttering, not dramatic, just there, solid, unshakable, like everything else about her. The youngest salesman, the one with the polished shoes, slick hair, and a name tag. That read Chase, blinked. Then he laughed, once, sharp and disbelieving. "Is this real?" he asked, waving a hand toward the cash like it was part of a prank show. "Is this a joke?" Ella said nothing. An older man stepped forward from behind the glass office. Expensive watch, tailored jacket, confident swagger. His name was Rick Delancey, general manager. His voice had the warm, practiced tone of someone who sold lies for a living. "Ma'am," Rick said, too friendly, too loud. "You'll have to understand. People don't usually walk in and drop a pile of cash on a $100,000 truck. That's not how this works." Ella looked at him, calm. "No loans. No trade-in. Just the truck," she replied. Rick chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And this is, what? Your savings? Retirement? Mattress money?" Chase grinned beside him, arms crossed. "It's cash," Ella said plainly. "It spends the same as plastic." Rick exhaled slowly, shifting his tone. "Look, I respect the effort, but this dealership operates with certain procedures. We run credit, check ID, verify income." "I don't need credit," she said. He ignored her. "And we don't just take money out of an envelope, even if it looks legit. You understand how this looks, right?" Ella glanced around. Customers pretended not to stare, but they were listening. The whisper of judgment hung in the air. "She's probably some kind of hoarder," Chase muttered under his breath, not quietly. "Enough." Still, Ella didn't flinch. "I'd like to speak with someone who can process a cash sale," she said. "I called ahead. I was told this truck was available." Rick raised an eyebrow. "You spoke with someone? Your receptionist. 2 days ago." Chase scoffed. "So you called, walked in, and expected to buy the most expensive truck on the lot, like it's a loaf of bread?" Ella met his gaze, slow and steady. "No. Like it's a tool." That silenced him for a beat. Then Rick leaned in, his voice quieter, colder. "Even if the money is real, there's paperwork, taxes, registration. This isn't a garage sale. People like you don't just show up and..." "People like me?" Ella asked softly. Rick straightened, sensing his slip. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant..." "You meant I don't look like I belong here." Silence. She let the words settle. Ella reached into her coat and pulled out a small folder. Inside were all the documents. ID, tax forms, even pre-filled registration info. Neat, clean, prepared. "I've waited a long time for this," she said. "I'm not here to waste time. Not mine and not yours." Rick's jaw tightened. Chase rolled his eyes, muttering, "This is ridiculous." Then, from the far side of the showroom, a quiet voice spoke up. "She's right." Everyone turned. A young woman stepped forward, early 30s, clipboard in hand. Her name badge read, "Carla." "I took her call," Carla said, 2 days ago. She asked smart questions. She knew the model, trim, towing specs. She said she'd be in on Saturday afternoon with payment ready. Carla walked up beside Ella, her tone measured. She was clear, direct, polite. "I scheduled the visit. It's on the board." Rick's eyes flicked toward the back wall where appointments were written in dry erase marker. There it was, Saturday, 2 p.m., Reed/Silverado/cash. Rick didn't speak. Chase stepped back, silent now. Ella looked at Carla and nodded once, grateful. "Let's sit down," Carla said. "We'll draw up the paperwork." As Carla led Ella to the desk, The sound of their footsteps echoed. Ella didn't look back. Rick muttered something under his breath and walked away, his polished shoes clicking faster now. And Chase? He stared at the envelope still resting on the hood. Not so funny anymore. The printer hummed. Keys tapped. Forms were signed one by one. Ella sat at Carla's desk, steady, composed, as the final pages of the transaction slid into place. The silver Silverado showroom centerpiece was now hers. No loans. No debt, just done. But the story wasn't over. As Carla handed her the final receipt and keys, she paused. "There's one more thing," Ella said softly. She stood, tucked the envelope of leftover bills into her coat, and looked through the tall glass windows to the service bay in back. The truck would be pulled around soon, but she wasn't done. "Do you mind if I drive it out myself?" she asked. Carla blinked. Drive it out? From the showroom? Through the main doors, right off the floor. Technically, it was allowed barely. Managers hated it, but there were no signs against. Still, it had to be done carefully. Slowly. Most people didn't ask. Carla hesitated. Ella added, "I've done harder things." A moment later, the keys were in her palm. Across the room, Rick watched from behind his glass office, arms crossed. Chase leaned in the doorway, arms folded, smirking. "This ought to be good," he muttered. The automatic doors to the showroom floor opened with a metallic groan. A ramp extended outside, slick with light dust. The Silverado still sat gleaming under overhead lights. Ella walked across the floor alone. Not hurried, not dramatic. She opened the driver's side door like she'd opened hundreds before, with ease, with memory. She climbed in, adjusted the mirrors, buckled her belt. Then, with a flick of her wrist and a low growl of the engine, the truck roared to life. People stopped mid-conversation. The truck's lights cut sharp lines through the air. The engine purred, deep and low. She eased it into gear, her boot steady on the pedal. With practiced motion, she tapped the accelerator, gently guiding the massive machine forward. There was no hesitation, no jerky start, just smooth, precise movement, like she'd been doing it all her life, because she had, in Nebraska fields, on frozen gravel roads, hauling broken tractors and stubborn cows, and trailers stacked with hay bales. Trucks were her language. Metal and torque and mud her mother tongue. The Silverado rolled forward across the gleaming tiles, tires whispering over the showroom floor. A child clapped. Someone stepped back, startled. Rick leaned forward, eyebrows twitching. She turned slightly, maneuvering between two parked vehicles with perfect clearance. An inch to spare on either side. Not a bump, not a scrape, just clean, exact movement. She tapped the brake, let it pause, checked her mirror, and then, with a final turn of the wheel, she aligned the nose of the Silverado with the open glass doors. Sunlight poured in, and Ella drove forward right off the floor. No spin-outs, no screech, just grace, confidence, mastery. Outside, the gravel crunched beneath her tires. She stopped at the base of the ramp, put the truck in park, stepped out. She stood tall beside the truck, hands in her coat, eyes calm. Rick walked out slowly, sunglasses on, trying to save face. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain away his assumptions. Ella didn't give him the chance. "Not bad for a woman with a cheap coat," she said. Then she turned to Carla. "Thank you for listening." Carla smiled. The kind of smile that carried respect, not pity. "You made my week." Chase stayed inside, behind the glass, pretending to type. Rick cleared his throat. "You're welcome back anytime, Ms. Reed." She looked at him. "I won't need another for a while," she said. She climbed back into the Silverado, adjusted the seat, and backed out like a pro. Not because she wanted attention, but because competence, true competence, doesn't shout. It just acts. And in that moment, even the loudest mouths had nothing left to say. Ella turned the wheel, merged onto the road, and drove off, the wind catching her. Gray hair through the open window. The sun, finally, broke through the clouds. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The Silverado's tail lights disappeared down the service road, its quiet strength still, echoing in the air like thunder long after the storm had passed. Inside the dealership, no one spoke for a while. The room had changed. Where there had been laughter, there was silence. Where there had been smirks, now, there was something quieter, something close to awe. The energy had shifted, as if the very air had gotten heavier, more honest. Rick Delancey stood with his arms loose at his sides, staring out the glass doors. He had nothing clever left to say. In a place where salesmen measured people by clothes, posture, and credit scores, they'd all just watch something unmeasurable, something raw, something that didn't fit their neat little boxes. No one had taught them how to handle dignity. Chase leaned against the doorway still, but his arms were no longer folded. His confidence had slipped like a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. He swallowed hard and looked down at his polished shoes. Across the showroom, Carla gathered the signed papers into a neat stack, but she didn't move from her desk. She just sat there for a moment, staring at the last page. Where Ella had signed, Ella M. Reed, small, square handwriting, steady and firm. The kind of signature that didn't ask for attention, but couldn't be ignored. Rick walked back inside slowly. He looked older now, smaller somehow in the suit that once gave him power. He tapped his fingers against the side of Carla's desk before speaking. "You knew," he said quietly. Carla glanced up. "You believed her from the beginning," he added, almost like a question. "I listened," Carla replied. Rick nodded, shame creeping into his expression. It didn't look comfortable on him. "She didn't flinch," he said. "Not once." "No," Carla said, her voice softer now. "She didn't need to." He stood in silence for a moment. Then, surprising even himself, he said the words that no one expected to hear. "I owe her an apology." He didn't wait for permission. He stepped outside, pulled out his phone, and stared at it. After a few seconds, he slipped it back into his pocket and looked down the empty road, as if hoping she might turn around. She didn't. Carla watched him from behind the glass. She didn't feel smug. She felt proud, not of herself, of Ella, of what it meant. Back inside, a younger salesman, one of the newer hires who had been laughing earlier, broke the silence. "Do you think she's done this before?" he asked. "Like, just walks in and proves people wrong?" "No," Carla said gently. "I think she just does what she says." The man blinked, as if that idea was foreign. Then he asked the question that surprised even him. "Can I talk to her if she comes back? I'd like to ask how she got like that, how she knew what she wanted." Another man chimed in from behind the coffee station. "Yeah, I kinda wanna know what she did for work, like how long she saved, how she stayed so calm." Carla smiled a little. Not because they were changing overnight, they weren't, but something had cracked, something had softened. For the first time in a long time, the room wasn't about noise and flash. It was about something heavier, realer. Respect, that was the word. Ella May Reed had left the dealership, but not empty. She had left it filled with a quiet kind of authority, with presence, and no one who saw her would forget it. Chase lingered by the front counter, staring out the window. His face was flushed. The joke had landed on him now. "She really brought cash," he muttered. "Like, cash." "And I laughed." Carla turned to him, her voice even. "She brought 30 years of work in an envelope, and you mocked it." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Rick stepped back inside after a long moment by the curb. He moved slower now, more deliberate. He walked over to Carla and said, "If she ever comes back, let her know I want to speak with her. Not as a customer," he added, "as a teacher." That landed harder than expected. For a moment, the dealership didn't feel like a showroom, felt like a classroom. And Ella? She wasn't just a buyer. She was the lesson. 2 weeks later, the truck returned. It didn't make a scene. There was no honking, no spectacle. The silver Silverado rolled into the dealership lot just as quietly as it had left, clean, powerful, dust on the tires, and purpose in its path. Ella May Reed stepped out, same worn coat, same calm eyes. But this time people noticed. This time they stood a little straighter. Carla was already at the front, her clipboard forgotten at her desk. She walked outside before Ella reached the door. "You came back," Carla said, smiling. Ella nodded. "I figured it was time. For another truck?" "No," Ella said, her voice low and warm. "For something more useful." Inside, Rick stood by the main desk, watching the scene unfold through the glass doors. This time he didn't wait. He walked out to greet her. No sales pitch, no forced grin. Just quiet respect. "Ms. Reed," he said. "Rick," she replied, not unkindly. He cleared his throat, almost nervous. "You made quite an impression. I wasn't trying to." That's what did it, he said. They stood in silence a moment, then Rick gestured toward the building. Would you come in? We've actually been hoping to talk to you. The back room had been cleared, where there used to be cardboard boxes and old banners from last year's promotions. Now stood rows of folding chairs, a dry erase board, a coffee station. Not perfect, not polished, but honest. A sign above the entrance, freshly taped, read, Saturday Workshops, Financial Literacy and Independent Buying with Ella M. Reed. First she said no. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't a teacher. But Carla asked again. So did one of the younger salesmen, the one who'd mocked her, who now sat every Saturday in the front row with a notepad and pen. And eventually Ella said yes. Not because she needed to. Because someone should. The first class had 5 people, then 12, then 24. They came from all over, retired folks, single moms, farmers, teen mechanics, second chance workers. Some had been laughed at too. Others just didn't want to be taken advantage of anymore. Ella didn't give grand speeches. She didn't inspire. She explained. She brought her old budget notebooks, coffee-stained, dog-eared. She showed how. She labeled every envelope, saved in categories, set realistic timelines. She talked about her first job at 17, how she saved change in a mason jar, how she taught herself how engines worked because mechanics charged her more just for being polite. She never claimed to be better than anyone. She just offered what she knew. Every dollar is a decision, she said once. Make enough quiet decisions and one day, you walk into a place with your chin up. People listened. Even Rick sat in sometimes, arms folded like always, but his face was different now. Not guarded. Learning. The dealership itself changed, too. The front desk kept printed copies of Ella's questions to ask before you buy a one-page guide with bullet points in her neat handwriting. No branding, no fluff, just the truth. And next to the coffee station, a simple frame held a quote she never meant to be famous. It's not about what you wear when you walk in. It's about what you carry in your mind and what you refuse to carry out in regret. They never laughed at envelope buyers again. Outside, the seasons turned. Ella's Silverado wore the marks of a truck well used. Mud on the fenders, scuffs on the tailgate, a dent near the hitch where she'd backed into a stubborn stump. But it ran beautifully. She started taking young mechanics from the local trade school for test drives, not to show off, but to teach them how real handling felt, how torque responded when pulling weight, how to feel the machine under their boots. She didn't call it mentoring. She called it doing what folks once did for me. Chase, the cocky salesman from before, never said much. But one Saturday after class, he waited until the others left. I've been reading that book you recommended, he mumbled, holding up a copy of The Millionaire Next Door. Didn't know people could live like that, slow, steady, quiet, rich. Ella smiled, the corners of her eyes soft. It's not about being rich, she said. It's about not being afraid. Late that evening, Ella stood alone beside her truck, watching the last of the sun fade over the hill behind the dealership. The parking lot was quiet now. Just a few scattered cars. The last glimmer of gold brushed the hood of her Silverado, casting long shadows across the gravel. Behind her, through the glass doors, a new class was beginning to gather. People she didn't know yet, people she understood. Carla waved from inside, a fresh stack of folders in her arms. Ella gave a small nod, not just to Carla, to the whole moment, to everything. Then she turned back to the truck, ran her hand gently across the tailgate, and smiled. She'd walked into that place as a simple woman once, humiliated, underestimated. Now, she was something else entirely. Not just respected, rooted, remembered, real, and far from done. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever walked into a room and felt invisible, judged by your clothes, your silence, or the way you carried yourself? Have you ever been looked past until you proved you couldn't be ignored? Ella May Reed wasn't flashy. She didn't need to be. She didn't raise her voice or demand respect. She earned it moment by quiet moment, year by quiet year. And when the time came, she let her actions speak with a clarity words never could. Maybe you've been where she was dismissed, doubted, or laughed at. Maybe you've been saving, preparing, learning behind the scenes. Maybe your moment hasn't come yet, but when it does, will you be ready? Will you walk in with your back straight, not to impress, but to stand in the truth of everything you've worked for, because greatness doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes it wears a faded coat. Sometimes it drives a dusty truck, but it's real, it's earned, and it changes the room the moment it enters. If Ella's story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell us about a time you were underestimated. Or better yet, tell us how you proved them wrong. And if you believe in stories that celebrate quiet strength, dignity, and real transformation, subscribe. You belong here, because in the end, greatness whispers. It doesn't shout.